Alright, so today we're going to continue with Unit 1 with what we call the Algebra Basics. And these are the important skills that form the foundation for most of the work that we're going to do this year. Every topic that we do is going to relate back to these in one way or another. The first topic is dealing with real numbers, and in particular fractions. You want to make sure that you know how to work with fractions because they'll show up when we solve equations, inequalities, and different types of expressions. Anytime we're dealing with addition or subtraction, we want to make sure we use what's called a common denominator. And this means that both fractions will have the same number in the bottom. The easiest way to do this is to find the LCM. So the least common multiple of 2 and 7 is 14. So if I have -3/2, I'm going to multiply by 7 over 7, just to make sure I maintain equivalence. And that's -21 over 14. Then we have 1/7 times 2 over 2, which will give me 2 over 14. So now these have a common denominator. I'm set to go ahead and add them. So we have -21 over 14, we have 2 over 14, and altogether we're going to have -19 over 14. This is going to be an acceptable final answer. I'm not going to have you guys turn this back out into a mixed number. Actually, a lot of the times the improper fraction is going to be more useful. Same rules hold for subtraction, so go ahead and pause the video and give that one a try. Sometimes it works out that you only need to change one of the fractions in order to get to your common denominator, and that's the case here. We have 8 and 4, and the least common multiple of those is 8, so we only have to change the 1/4. We do that, we subtract, we get 5/8. Multiplication and division are a little bit easier because we don't need to worry about that common denominator. We do, however, want to get rid of any mixed numbers. So we do that by multiplying the denominator by the whole number out in front and then adding anything that we have in the numerator. So 3.5, we multiply 2 by 3, we get 6, plus 1 is the same thing as 7 over 2. And then we have the 2/5 right here. Now when we multiply fractions, we can look for anything that we can cross-reduce in the beginning. Here I see 2's, so I can divide both of those by 2 and we get 1. Then remember, we multiply horizontally, numerator to numerator, denominator to denominator, and we're going to get 7 over 5 for our product here. When we divide, this is where you're often going to see that keep, change, flip acronym that we'll use, because we want to keep the first fraction the same, change the division to multiplication, and flip the second fraction around to multiply by the reciprocal. When you've got this negative out in front, you can assign it to the numerator or to the denominator, but only to 1. I usually go with the numerator just to be consistent. So we're going to have -2 over 3. We change the division to multiplication, and we take the reciprocal, or we flip the second fraction. Now we can use that cross reduction again. 2 and 5, they don't have any common factors, but 3 and 6, we can divide both of those by 3, and now we multiply straight across. And we're going to have -4 over 5. Anytime you're dealing with fractions, you always want to make sure that your numerator and denominator are relatively prime, meaning that there's nothing that can be simplified between the two of them. Okay, next thing we want to look at is exponents. Okay, exponents are just a shortcut to represent repeated multiplication. So 3 squared is the same thing as 3 times 3, or 9. 4 to the 5th would be 4 multiplied by itself 5 times. And that's going to be 1024. 2 to the 7th, we just repeatedly multiply by 2 7 times. We get 128. 8 cubed would be 8 times 8 times 8. And we are going to get... we're going to get 512 there. In order to do that on the calculator, if you're squaring, there's a little button with x squared on it you can use. Or you can use the caret button, so you would type in your base, caret, and then your exponent. Parentheses make a big difference when we're dealing with negative numbers because of the order of operations, exponents come before multiplication. So this expression on the right is the same thing as -1 times 3 squared. So the exponent comes first, so it's -1 times 9, which is -9. Whereas here, this is just saying that we're repeatedly multiplying -3, and our product there is going to be positive. So you want to be careful with parentheses when you have a negative base. When we take square roots, we're figuring out what number times itself gives us the number underneath the radical here. On your calculator, you're just going to hit the second and then the square root button and type in the number. So we do that with 196. We get square root of 14. If you have a number on the outside, it's just 2 times the square root. We're multiplying, it's kind of like a coefficient there. And you can actually type that right into your calculator 2 times, and then second x squared, 289, and we'll get 34. The square root of 289 is 17, so 2 times 17 is 34. Cube roots are the same idea, except we're saying what times itself 3 times gives us the number underneath. And we're allowed to have negatives underneath here, because now we can have negative times negative times negative to get us a negative answer. We will never have a negative underneath the square root. And you can do these on the calculator as well. You're just going to hit the math button and then the 4th option. Then just type in your argument, the number underneath, and here we'll get negative 3. We can do the same thing for the cube root of 216, and we're going to get 6. Order of operations is a big one. We will use this all year. I finally made the transition over to GEM-DOS because I feel like that grouping symbol is going to be really important. So we always start by simplifying anything within a grouping. This could be parentheses, any sort of absolute value, any radical, and then any sort of fractional expression. So if you had like 3 plus 6 plus 7 over 2 minus 5, this would need to be simplified first before you can do the rest of your expression. And this is posted on the wall in my room. The M and the D are the same color because they go together within the same step. Same with the A and the S, together within the same step. And we just follow through that order of operations, working from left to right. So go ahead, pause the video, try this one on your own, and see how it goes. Okay, so first, we look for any grouping symbols, and we have a grouping symbol here. So everything else is going to come down exactly the same, and then I start working inside that absolute value. Once I'm inside my grouping symbol, the order of operations resets. So I don't have any grouping, I don't have any exponents, but I do have multiplication. So I do the multiplication first. Everything outside stays the same. And then we go through until we're finished with that. And we have to finish out that absolute value. So the value of negative 11 is 11 before we move on. Now we move on to our next step. We have exponents, and I do have an exponent on the end. So we have this plus 9. Now we move on to multiplication and division. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're doing multiplication or division first, as long as you're moving from left to right. So first we have this 4 divided by 2, which is 2. 3 times 11 is 33, plus 9. Then again, we just move left to right. And when we simplify that, our final answer is negative 22. Now, if you're more comfortable combining a couple steps, I'm okay with that. So pause the video, try the second question, and see how you do with that one. Alright, so here we have this whole thing that we need to simplify, and I like to work on the numerator and the denominator kind of simultaneously. So we start inside the parentheses up top. So we have 12 minus 7 still inside the parentheses. And then in the denominator, we have negative 2. We have to start inside the parentheses here. We start with the exponent, minus 6. Then we just keep going. So 12 minus 7 is in parentheses, so that comes first. So we have 5 plus 3. And we have negative 2, and inside, another negative 2. And we keep going until it's completely simplified. And our final answer here is actually just going to be 2. Our last thing is evaluating expressions. We're going to have 2 steps here. We're going to substitute values, and these are called replacement values. So we're going to take out the variables and use this as our key to figure out what goes in the place of those variables. And then we're going to simplify. I will always look for step number 1. In order to get full credit, you need to include that step. So my first step here is going to be x squared, so negative 3 squared. Make sure you use parentheses because I want to square negative 3. Then we have negative 2 squared. So the parentheses matter here. Those are very important. And I'll be on you guys all year about those parentheses. So this is negative 3 times negative 3, so that's 9. And then negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. So here we get 5 is our final answer. Go ahead, pause the video, and try the next one. Alright, so for this one, we substitute in again using parentheses. Make sure you catch that negative when you cube the -2, your product there is going to be -8. So just make sure you catch that. We go through and simplify, and we get 42. We got 2 more that are a little more complicated. Go ahead, pause, see if you can figure these out. Alright, so substituting in, watching our signs, being careful as we go. We get 0 for the first question, and -18/17 for the second question. Usually, 95% of the time, we're going to leave these as simplified improper fractions. We're not going to turn things into decimals, because usually with these decimals, they're not going to be nice. We're going to have to round them and our answer won't be exact. So unless your directions tell you otherwise, always leave your answer in simplified improper fraction form.